Hello lads, Chad here. Welcome to my place where Sigma male and female belong. Today's Sigma is Malena from 2000. Like and subscribe to Chad and become a Sigma. Spoilers ahead, watch out. The film is set in 1940 during World War II, just as Italy enters the war, where the fascist dictator Mussolini announces that Italy is entering World War II with France and Great Britain. From the other side, a 13-year-old boy named Renato just got a new bike from his father. He looks so happy and rides around the place to try his new bike. He then shows his new bike to his friends until their friends ask him to sit on the side, where he sees for the first time, together with his friends, the beautiful and sensual Malena walks down the street. She is the most beautiful woman in Castelcuto, Italy. Renato is mesmerized by her beauty. As they begin to follow her and stop again in front of her, just want to see her sexy body. Renato sees her chest and starts to imagine making love with her. And it proves that Malena's father, Professor Bonsignori, is a Latin teacher who teaches Renato and his friends at school. They make a joke with him by saying that they want to make love with his daughter. In reply, he only says yes because of his hearing loss. At night, Renato can't even sleep and all he thinks is Malena's chest. He realized that he's crushing on her now. The next day, he decides to skip the class and goes to Malena's house, where he daydreams about Malena, asks him to buy her a cigarette and sees her smoothie tight. He becomes obsessed with her. His father knows that he has skipped the class and starts to beat him. Later that night, he sneaks out of his room and goes to Malena's house. He is spying on her in her house by climbing the tree and peeping through a hole in the window. He sees Malena wearing a sexy dress and walking around until he spots a picture of her husband. It shows that Malena's husband, Nino, leaves to serve in the military. In the daylight, he also goes back to Malena's house and spies on her through his telescope as watches her sunbathing. Renato heads back to her house again. At this time, he can see her chewy chest when she starts to dance as the music plays. The next day, where he goes to record store and buy a copy of vinyl that Malena played last night. At his room, where he plays his vinyl and looks at the picture of woman, he starts to imagine it is Malena and thinks of her in all his erotic fantasies. As his obsession gets wilder and has been following her around where she goes to. At this moment, as Malena walks around the street, and everyone knows that she is the most desired young woman in town. And because of her physical appearance and her solitary status, she is an object of lust for all the town's men and hatred for its women. At school, the students love to play around with Malena's father. They joke around by saying something they want to do with his daughter. Renato has his new habit besides spying on Malena. He loves to imagine himself making love with, and it makes his bed creaking until his father asks him to stop. One day, the leader announces the death of Malena's husband in front of the people. All the women become worried and plan to keep an eye on their husbands from Malena. After that, Renato goes back to Professor Bonsignori's house, where he sees Malena in bed and cries over the loss of her husband. In his imagination, he tries to comfort her by saying that he always be there for her. Malena is attending her husband's funeral, and all the men start gossiping and think it's an opportunity to get her. One moment, Renato walks over Malena's house and steals her black underwear from her clothesline. Later that night, he sniffs her underwear like a dog while imagining her with his wilder fantasies. The next morning, Renato's father walks into his room and finds him sleeping with underwear draped over his head. His parents become upset and strictly punish him, trying to break his fixation. When his punishment is over, he heads back to Malena's house. As he begins to realize that the street now filled with the men staring at her house. In the middle of class, Professor Bonsignori receives a slanderous letter about her daughter's sexual morals and decides to leave the class at that time. At night, for 100 times Renato returns to Malena's house, but now he sees Lieutenant Cade inside her house. On his way out, the lieutenant meets the dentist, who also wants to visit Malena's house. The dentist doesn't like it and slaps the lieutenant, and they fight at each other until the dentist's wife comes with the police. Malena goes to her father's house and tries to unlock the door, but the key doesn't fit in. She realized that her father doesn't want to have a connection with her anymore. Malena has to deal with the fact that she is denounced and put on trial by the wife of the dentist. She tries to explain that she knows the dentist only visited her once when he gave her father medicine. The judge then asks about her relationship with the lieutenant, but she deserves to don't answer his question, and it's not even the law's concern. Because of that, the lieutenant is sent away. Malena's attorney tries to defend her as best as he can, and finally, the judge says that she's not guilty and free from any punishment. Malena's attorney celebrates their win by dancing with her. She pays him with the money she has, but he refuses. He wants to be paid for another thing, and it shows that he forces her to have sex with him. As Renato watches them until suddenly, the tree breaks and makes him fall. Renato decides to spy on the attorney. He visits his mother and asks her permission to marry Malena, but she refuses and kicks him out. Malena's poverty finally forces her to succumb to anything. One day, she meets a man who gives her food. He offers her to make love with him for the payment. Suddenly, there's an explosion and bomb in the town that makes destroyed several buildings. And it makes Professor Bonsignori is killed. His body is found under the building debris. She has to face the reality that she lost her husband and father. Even in grief, the men still stare at her body. Later that night, she decides to cut her hair. She changes her appearance by coloring her hair red. As she walks down the city and makes all the men mesmerized by her beauty, meanwhile all the women look at her cynically. She changes her beauty images and makes the wives' fantasies about her a reality. With nobody willing to give her work, the only thing she can do to survive is sinking into a hooker. When the German army comes to town, Malena gives herself to the Germans as well. As Renato sees her and imagines what she does with those people, and suddenly, he faints. His mother and the older ladies of the town think that he has been possessed by the devil and take him to church to exorcise the demons. His father, however, understands that he is suffering from sexual hunger and takes him to a brothel. Renato has sex with one of the prostitutes while fantasizing that she is Malena. On that night, he officially becomes a man. The Germans leave and American troops enter the town, welcomed by ecstatic cheers. The women of the village gather and, out of jealousy and hatred, publicly beat and humiliate Malena by dragging her out, ripping off her clothes, beating her, and cutting off her hair like she is trash. Malena screams in pain, but nobody helps her. The next day, Malena decides to leave her town by train. Renato just can see her from afar. He doesn't even have any courage to talk with her. A few days later, Malena's husband, Nino, returns to town, to the shock of all the people. It proves that he lost his arm and goes back to the city to meet his wife. Turns out, he finds his house occupied by people displaced by the war. Nino goes to meet former fascists, but all he got is being mocked by them, and nobody wants to tell him how to find his wife. They also say that his wife is hooker. At night, Renato tells him through an anonymous letter about Malena's whereabouts to Nino. Renato says that his wife was faithful to him. Nino is the only man she loved, and that's the honest truth. He also informs him the last time he saw his wife was on a train from Messina. And Nino goes to Messina to find his wife. The story continues into a year later. Renato becomes a teenager and has a girlfriend. Suddenly, people are stunned to see Nino and Malena show up and strolling through the town. Everyone notices that she now looks more matronly and plainer, even still beautiful. Renato just can't believe what he sees. Despite all the facts, Malena is still being the attention of everyone. She then meets the women that used to attack her. Though still beautiful, they think of her as no threat, claiming that she had wrinkles near her eyes and put on some whey. People no longer consider her a threat and begin speaking of her and to her with more respect. Renato comes back to his old habit of spying on Malena. At that time, he helps her pick up some oranges that had dropped from her shopping bag. Afterward, he talks with her for the first time and says, "Good luck, Mrs. Malena," and rides off on his bicycle, looking back at her for a final time, as she walks away, with the retrospective thought that Renato hasn't forgotten her, even after a few years. He says, "Of all the girls who ask me if I remember them, the only one I remembered is the one who did not ask, and that's Malena." Being a Sigma isn't easy, lads. People will despise you and may even harm you. But a Sigma, like Malena, refuses to give up and asserts her rightful place in the world. Time's up, lads. A Sigma will like and subscribe. Chat out.